Ancient Rome's cities and towns would have had as much to offer as our modern cities, but I suppose it all comes down to your definition of nightlife. We know with certainty that the city of Rome itself had countless tabernacle or bars. One short segment of an ancient Roman street, still well preserved, nestled between Trajan's market and what was once the city's suburb, and today called Via Biberatica, is believed to have had a cluster of them. Here you could go for a respectable late-night drink, meet up with friends and enjoy some good conversation, play a board game, or even partake in a bit of friendly gambling, though generally illegal. Gambling was a pastime enjoyed by Romans of all classes, including Augustus. In some of Rome's less refined neighborhoods, including the Labrum, the suburb, and the areas around the city's old naval and emporium warehouse district, there would have been numerous popular, distinctly plebeian drinking establishments more frequented by prostitutes, the criminal element, and perhaps even the occasional aristocrat out for a bit of nocturnal excitement. They were often the setting for raucous drunkenness, hardcore gambling, and all-out brawls. If you were looking for a late-night snack, there were innumerable fast food shops called Thermopolis. These establishments were the forerunners of our modern restaurants. We know that a relatively small city like Pompeii had over 100 of them, so a vast metropolis like Rome would, at a minimum, have had several thousand, with some streets entirely devoted to them. Most Thermopolis had a street front takeout counter, but we do know from examples at Ostia Antica, Pompeii, and Herculaneum that they also offered areas for sit-down eating. Yes, Romans didn't always eat laying down, but it was still essentially fast food, and even sitting down to eat at a McDonald's is still just McDonald's. Much like Las Vegas or Dubai, the real partying is happening at the elite levels, among the idle rich who could afford day-long banquets, extravagant activities such as live lion hunts, and import dancers from as far away as Spain. In Rayon's reconstruction of a debauched night out, he follows a typical nouveau riche who goes slumming in the grimmier parts of the city, picks fights that his bodyguards sort out, and then lies his way into a party at a mansion by claiming to know a friend inside. He also bribes the guards, and then it's on and on until the break of dawn. There were various types of ancient Roman inns and hotels, many sharing similar, interchangeable functions but different names. Those classed broadly as eateries: Corpanae, Tabernacle, Popanae, and Thermopolis, were found in the busy social and commercial areas of a city, around the forum, bathhouses, and along residential streets. Rooms could also be rented in some of these eateries. However, visitors to towns and cities could also choose to stay in dedicated hotels and motels, hospitals, stabulae, or, if they were on the road, mansions, where they could eat and rent a room or a bed for the night, or longer. For the majority of Romans, though, the cities weren't bustling at night. Most people rose at dawn and slept at dusk. Bars at eateries did exist, however. After the dinner hour, these weren't family-friendly establishments. There was gambling and drinking, harried waitresses who didn't have time for dummies, and the beer and wine were cheap and exceptionally low quality. Both the Greeks and the Romans preferred their wine heavily watered down, which might have been necessary for its strong taste. Sweeteners like honey would also be added to improve the taste, and most wine, fermented in vats, only lasted up to a year before turning to vinegar. Rome's great bathing complexes were much more than just a place to keep clean. In the 1st century AD, they were among the few places where it was socially acceptable for single men and women to mix relatively freely. In general, they were places for Romans of all classes to socialize, as well as venues for reading, grabbing a bite to eat, attending lectures, going for a swim, or getting in a workout. If your idea of a night out tended to the more highbrow, Rome had several theaters where you could go to see the latest tragedy or comedy performed, and Odeons, where musical competitions and recitals took place. Hadrian's Athenaeum included a 900-seat performing arts center where you could attend lectures on Greek philosophy and hear poetry readings. And close by, Trajan's Forum contained twin Greek and Latin libraries for the more studious. And yes, Rome would also have had many brothels, just as we know Pompeii had, and where several have been excavated. But how late all these attractions stayed open, or rather, how willing you were to visit them after dark, was perhaps determined more by how much risk you were willing to take. Rome certainly had nightlife venues, but getting to them and back home again could be fraught with peril. You have to remember that street lighting, something that we now take for granted, is still a fairly recent invention. Most of Rome's streets would likely have been dark and dangerous places after the sun went down. Though some of the main thoroughfares, intersections, or venues may have had some torch lighting, the reality was that anyone venturing out at night risked everything from a simple mugging to being run down by a young toff in his speeding chariot or mangled by a cart at a busy intersection. Rome's freight and cargo traffic, as well as business deliveries within the city walls, was restricted to the nighttime in an attempt to reduce street congestion. The closest thing Rome had to what we would consider a police force was the vigils, who patrolled the city streets at night, primarily on the lookout for fires and escaped slaves, and to maintain general order. Later, in the imperial era, urban cohorts attempted to keep the city's gangs under control, as well as to maintain the general peace. But in a city of over 1 million residents, they and the vigilers would have been few and far between. But if it was a night of fine dining, great gossip, and stimulating conversation to the accompaniment of music you were looking for, then you'd likely not find it in even the best Thermopolis or taberna. Instead, you'd want to finagle an invitation to dinner at the home of one of Rome's equestrian or patrician families, or better yet, to the Palatine for a banquet hosted by the emperor. Here, you'd eat food prepared to the highest standards, drink the finest Falernian wine, and rub shoulders with some of Rome's most celebrities and thinkers. You might even have found yourself sharing a lecture with Juvenal, listening attentively as he delivered a biting discourse lamenting the decline of traditional Roman virtues and morals in the modern-day capital. For most Romans, the day began at dawn and ended at dusk. Since the absence of strong artificial light made work difficult after dark, shops kept daylight hours. And since the unlimited streets were dangerous at night, most people stayed near home after sunset, venturing out only to the local bar. This was partly a matter of necessity. The cramped apartments in which most Romans lived lacked a kitchen. So for a decent meal, the only option was to open a local taberna or kolkma, a restaurant serving fast food and cheap wine. In Pompeii, there was at least one tavern for every 100 inhabitants. Roman network may have been equally dense. Although many Roman travelers called most of their food to go, some were restaurants, with tables and built-in booths for diners. The food was basic, centered on such staples as bread, cheese, roasted duck peas, and sausages. Whatever was on the menu, bars were the favorite spots for gambling and drinking. When the rich partied, they partied hard, to mention only emperors. Tiberius hosted a drinking bout that lasted 2 entire days. One star of this world was the epic tippler nicknamed Trecongius, literally 3-gallon guy whose party trick was to drink 3 gallons of wine in a single pull. Another was the legendary gourmand Sapiens, who exhausted a vast fortune in a quest for the perfect dinner. Although party animals of this caliber were exceptional, they had many imitators. The tombstone of the Roman woman notes that she liked to drink wine and have a good time. When they weren't at the banquet, some wealthy Romans, usually young nun, liked to go slumming off neighborhoods. Emperors were no exceptions. Nero disguised himself with an arg and cruised the mean streets, breaking into shops and starting fights. Otho and his friends pulled pranks on drinking, stumbling off the taverns. Lucius Evans brawled with neighborhood tough, returning to the palace with a bruised face and black eyes. For commoners, in short, nightlife consisted of drinking and gambling in the local tavern. But for the members of the elites, it could be epic progress from mansion to mansion and from party to party, sometimes with a few dive bars between. In ancient times, a hot night was without a shadow of a breeze. The Dog Star is built beside the moon and marble floors are as hot as blood. There were 100 travels. It looks like 100 others. a marble-top bar with jars of clay lime stacked behind it, a half-dozen tables of regulars, 2 waitresses hustling drinks. There was a time when you and your friends would pick fights in places like this. These days, people prefer to gamble. There isn't money in it among commoners, and the flakes are always low. But there is nothing like the feeling